Hey everyone, and welcome back to Masonzero MTG. As promised, in this video, I'm going to go through my favorite The Brothers War cards for Cube. I actually already made one video about this set, where I went through a black-white reanimate archetype for Pauper Cube, which was helped out by some pretty cool cards in this set. So, if that sounds like you'd enjoy it, be sure to check out that video as well. But for now, let's get into the best cards for Cube from The Brothers War. Misery's Shadow immediately struck me as an awesome choice for Cube because of how much it brings to the table. It's the best shade creature ever printed, letting you pay 1 mana to give it +1/+1. Other shades let you do this, but they usually require specifically black mana. Misery's Shadow lets you do it with any kind of mana, making it easy to splash into any deck. The first ability of exiling your opponent's creatures when they die is also super helpful, and is part of why cards like Dathi Voidwalker and Kalidas Trader of Get are good. It's an ability that turns off death triggers and prevents graveyard reanimation. It's a nice ability considering the card would be pretty good with or without it. Bushwhack. Bushwhack is a fun green 1-drop. It combines Prey Upon and Lay of the Land, which are both useful effects to have, but aren't great cards on their own. In this case, you get to choose one of the two for the same mana cost, which I think makes both of these potentially underwhelming effects much better. I don't think I really need to explain why both of these effects are good, they just explain themselves, and it's great in your opening hand or when you draw it later on in the game. Loran of the Third Path has already been a popular card for Cube and Commander, because it's strictly better than Reclamation Sage, but it's in white. It kills an artifact or enchantment when it enters the battlefield, but also has Vigilance. On top of that, it can tap to have you and your opponent each draw a card. While not exactly card advantage, this creature does offer additional card draw in a color that often needs it. Overall, it's a great disenchant effect with a lot of cool upsides. Teferi Temporal Pilgrim is a mono-blue planeswalker that just synergizes nicely with blue stuff without being too oppressive or annoying like other Teferi planeswalkers. At 5 mana, it's definitely on the higher end, but Teferi gets loyalty counters whenever you draw a card, which just happens to also be his 0 ability. His -2 is great, making a 2/2 token that gets a +1/+1 counter whenever you draw a card. This can defend Teferi pretty well and become a game ender on its own if left unchecked. If you draw 2 cards per turn, you can just keep pumping out these tokens until the end of the game. His ultimate is a -12, which seems like a lot, but since he gets loyalty for each card drawn, it's not unreasonable to be able to activate it. If you do, you get a pretty normal blue board wipe that lets an opponent bounce 1 permanent to their hand and the rest of their non-lands get shoveled into their library. Not bad, but not crazy. Will hopefully let you win the game with any creatures that you happen to have on board that don't get bounced. This set has a cycle of 5 monocolored commands, and I'd say they're all reasonable, but I think Gix's command is probably the most playable one. At 5 mana, you can choose 2 of the following. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature and it gains lifelink until end of turn, destroy each creature with power 2 or less, return up to 2 creatures from your graveyard to your hand, or each opponent sacrifices a creature with the highest power they control. I think that final ability is usually going to be the best one, since it's basically guaranteed to remove the biggest threat on the table, like Blightsteel Colossus, the Titans, or hey, even a token from that Teferi from earlier. But the lifelink ability can help swing your life total back into a safe territory, the second ability is kind of just like a token or aggro board wipe, and the third ability makes Gix's command the perfect top deck card if you're running out of gas later in the game. Every ability is good by the time you'll be able to cast it, and it's as helpful when you're behind as when you're ahead, which I think makes it a great card that you're never sad to have in your hand. Combat Courier is as useful as it is adorable. It's a colorless 1/1, which means you can technically play it in any deck and get it out on turn 1. Maybe you'll get in some free damage on your opponent, or maybe you'll block something bigger, but you can pay 2 mana and sacrifice it to draw a card. It's nice to be able to cash it in like this, but even better, you can unearth it for just 1 blue mana. This is sort of like paying 3 mana to draw a card, unless maybe you can get in for 1 damage in the meantime. Regardless, anything that can get in a little bit of attacking or blocking then replace itself twice is good in my opinion. Legions to Ashes can exile a non-land permanent and all tokens with the same name that player controls. So it's 3 mana for a sort of token board wipe, but it also deals with anything that has made token copies of itself. This card makes Vindicate look sad, unless you care about blowing up lands, and it's probably about on par with Anguished Unmaking, since Anguished Unmaking is an instant despite costing 3 life to cast. Clearly it joins a long line of 3 mana Orzhov removal spells, giving you more options for this slot, but it does have some compelling upsides compared to the previous versions. Well, it looks like young Pyromancer finally ended up in the colors that it was supposed to be in all along. Let's be honest, you're not often playing young Pyromancer without also playing blue, so Third Path Iconoclast fits perfectly into the Izzet archetype. But other than being slightly harder to cast in 2 colors, it's also a much better card. Young Pyromancer makes tokens only off of casting an instant or sorcery, while Third Path Iconoclast triggers from any non-creature spell, which means it includes artifacts and planeswalkers. Since it also makes artifact creature tokens, you can use this with any artifact synergies as well. It's a great card and I highly recommend replacing Young Pyromancer if you're brave enough to swap out that staple. Steel Seraph is a 3-drop or a 6-drop, but it doesn't really matter which you choose, and in fact it might just be better as a 3-drop. If you do cast it for 3 mana, you'll get a 3/3 with Flying, and the ability to grant a creature Flying, Vigilance, or Lifelink on your combat step. There have been a few cards like this, but this might be the best one considering its low cost. Being able to cast it as a 6 mana 5/4 flyer later in the game is really nice, and you can target itself with the ability. So even if you do top deck it while behind, you have a chance to recover with 6 power of Evasive Lifelink. Felden Ronam Excavator is a hasty 2 mana 2/2 that can't block, so it's built around aggression, but whenever it's dealt damage, you exile that many cards from your library, and you can play one until your next turn. At a minimum, this means that if you lose him in combat or to a burn spell, you'll get a card to replace him. And if they overkill him with the burn spell, you'll have more card selection to choose from. I would consider this to be roughly equivalent to Abbot of Carol Keep, although they definitely belong in different archetypes. But they both let you do an impulsive draw while having a 2 mana creature. It's a fun red aggro card that does red things. What's there not to like? So those are my top 10 cards for Cube from the Brothers War. Hope you liked this video, and I'm curious to hear what you think of my choices and if you've been testing any of these cards or any others. I'll have my Phyrexia All Will Be One Cube video out in just a couple days, so check that out when it's up. I'll see you all in that video, and thank you so much for watching.